afternoon, everybody. Continuing the series of clinical challenges in cardiology, this is the second part. Now, although I'm calling it clinical challenges, they are really very important topic because we use a clinical case to decide the practical approach, but a lot of background principles are being discussed, and these are very important from practical patient management as well as your exam point of view. So try to understand, try to go back and read, because I cannot teach everything in this matter of 1 hour, but go back and read these topics. Okay. So, and I told Nikhil that for few people would have to be ready to answer questions, because unless it's a session is interactive, there's no point in doing a case discussion. So I'll be asking questions, and one or two people quickly put on your mic and should answer questions. Okay? Shall I go?
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. So the first case is a 67-year-old. Actually, he's a doctor, ex-army man, general practitioner now. Ex-army man, very fit man. No? He's a regular runner in marathon races, 21 kilometers races he runs, and he trains regularly for 20-25 kilometers runs and all. And been doing it regularly. He's now 67. He's very fit. Mild diabetes mellitus. He's under regular physical training. Other problems are he has a history of dyspepsia and gets relief with antacids and pantoprazole. Apart from that, he's been quite well. Mild diabetes, controlled on oral drugs. And during the course of his marathon training, he noticed for the last several weeks that he feels, when he starts to run, he feels heavy in the chest. And then he slows down for a few minutes, drinks some water, takes his dyspepsia tablet, and then he runs again, and then he completes the 25 kilometers run. He has no other symptom, and he has no dyspnea. So it was present for last 4 to 5 weeks, and therefore he went for a master health checkup. On a physical examination, obviously there were no abnormal findings, and resting ECG and X-ray were normal. Okay, what do you want next?
Treadmill test, sir.
Stress test.
So one gentleman said blood test, and one gentleman said master health checkup. Always they do the blood test even before the patient walks in. No? So I think I would agree with the blood test, because master health checkup, the blood results often come even before the patient does come. Okay. So blood, nothing great. Mild dyslipidemia and HbA1c of 7.6%. Normal urea and creatinine, normal hemoglobin, and nothing looked particularly exciting. He had a echo which showed normal cardiac anatomy, normal left ventricle, LA dimensions, ejection fraction 62%, normal Doppler flow. So the master health checkup people said you need a treadmill, go for a treadmill. So he enrolled a treadmill, and he completed 12 mets and almost 13 minutes. No symptoms, no normal BP response. I will show you the treadmill tracing in a minute. Oblique ST depression was reported. There's some difference of opinion, 0.5 to 1 millimeter, but it was upsloping ST depression at peak exercise. And when he stopped exercise, the ST segment depression disappeared within less than a minute of stopping exercise. So, and here is the tracing. What is your interpretation of this treadmill exercise?
ST depression in inferolateral leads.
No, that's not a report, man. Oh, that's not the way you report treadmill. No, ST depression and infralaterally. You have to say something more. No, you think it's significant, not significant, diagnostic, not diagnostic.
Sir,
Talk
sir,
something more. No,
ST depression is more than 0.5 to 1 mm. But sir, since
no,
it
no, no,
is
wait. 0.5 to 1 mm, that range I cannot accept. When you report a
yes,
treadmill, do you say more than 0.05 to 1? I said 0.5 to 1 millimeter because some people say reported as 0.5, some people reported as 1 in the same department. That's why I said that. But you can't say that. You have to commit yourself. What is this treadmill report? You are a cardiologist. Give me a report.
sir, in lead 2, there is a depression of 1, 2, 3. There is a depression of 1.5 mm, sir, in lead 2, and a depression of almost 1 mm, sir, in lead 3, and sir, in lead V4 and V5, same as in lead 2, sir. Depression of 1 mm, sir.
So
So, sir, this is significant, but sir, since it is at the peak of exercise and within 1 minute, the changes subsided, sir. So, and it is, sir, but sir, settled within 1 minute of stress test, sir.
you're repeating what I said. No, you're not giving me your report.
Yeah. Mm, sir, I will take these changes as significant, sir,
So what is your
because
final report? Positive for ischemia, negative for ischemia, strongly positive, strongly positive,
positive for ischemia, sir.
strongly positive for ischemia, mildly positive for ischemia, borderline test cannot be commented upon. You have to say something. Strongly positive, positive, equivocal, not clear, negative,
Positive,
huh?
positive for ischemia, sir.
Just positive. Mildly positive, strongly positive. You want to commit or no, you don't want to commit?
Sir, I would go for mildly positive for ischemia, sir.
I have to ask you, look, this is the problem in the examination. Now, I have to ask you about 6 questions to elicit one treadmill report from you. Isn't it? This is what the problem. Now, I have to keep on asking so many questions. And finally, now you are concluding it's a mildly positive test. That's what you're telling? Did I hear
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Your
Yes, sir.
report
Yes,
is
sir.
mildly, okay. Does anybody else want to comment on the final report? I don't want a detailed description again. Detailed description, everybody can make it in their own mind.
Strongly positive, sir.
Huh?
Because ST elevation in the AVR is there, I consider strongly positive.
You think it is strongly positive? Because ST elevation AVR is there, okay?
Yes.
Right. So we are now two distinct opinions. One says mildly positive, one says strongly positive. But strongly positive, you think there were 12 METs and he achieved a target heart rate. Even then, he didn't have any symptoms. You call that a strongly positive test? Okay.
Sir,
Um,
sir, these ST depressions are upsloping. So usually upsloping are common in elderly people, sir. And the ST depression which are downsloping or horizontal and which are more than 2 mm are usually considered strongly positive. And they are more sensitive if they are considered at 80 milliseconds from the starting point of ST segment, sir. This depressions are more than 2 mm. And if they are persisting in recovery, then they are again considered strongly positive, sir, again, sir. And with symptoms if they are, sir.
So now let us see what the people who did the test in my hospital, what did they report? Okay, they said good exercise tolerance, obviously done 12, 13 minutes and then stopped because the technician stopped only because the heart rate was achieved. No angina, no arrhythmia, normal BP response, ST changes seen during peak exercise reverted immediately. Now, as I said, there were two technicians. One thought it was less than 1 millimeter at 80 milliseconds, and because it's upsloping at 80 milliseconds is less than 1 millimeter and it disappears immediately and stopping exercise. He thought it was not a significant test, and he wanted to report it as borderline positive. No, he is not sure. Bottom. Another gentleman thought, no, it is 1 millimeter depression, and therefore I will call it a positive treadmill test. There were two opinions in our lab. Okay, So just like what you said. But very rightly you said, the standard definition of a positive treadmill test is 1 millimeter ST depression at 80 milliseconds after the J point. Now, a horizontal ST depression and downsloping ST depression definitely is more significant than an upsloping ST depression. This patient has got upsloping ST depression everywhere, which is the typical pattern seen in a false positive test. Okay. The only unusual thing in the whole thing is this ST segment shows in AVR shows some elevation, but otherwise this treadmill was interpreted as borderline positive to mildly positive. That's the range it was. Nobody was very sure about strongly positive. That's our conclusion also, except one gentleman in your group who thought it was strongly positive, isn't it? Shall we proceed? Any other opinions? So there was a difference of opinion I have shown. See, mildly positive, false positive, negative, borderline, so many opinions were there. So can you conclude any other conclusion from this TME? Can you make? Any conclusion about the extent of coronary artery disease or severity?
Sir, even if there is ischemia, sir, it's not very severe because the patient has walked more than 12 minutes, sir, and achieved the target heart rate, sir. So that is a good prognostic sign.
Okay. So
yes,
you feel that it is positive, but probably it's very mild, and there's extent of coronary artery disease. If it is there, it is either it is not there, or if it is there, it is very mild. Am I right? Am I right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Right.
Sir, sorry to disturb. I have a difference of opinion, sir.
Yeah, come on, go ahead.
Sir, if you were to consider his history, where he said that he would initially walk, then feel discomfort, and then continue walking after rest, and his HbA1c is 7.6, and looking at his STT changes.
No, wait. His history, you're changing the history. His history is he would begin to run, and then he would have some heaviness. He would, slow down, have some water, have some antacid tablets.
Yes, sir.
And then after maybe I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, that whatever that gap of few minutes, and then he would start running, and then he would complete his 20 kilometers run.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I feel that is angina, sir, and there is some amount of ischemic preconditioning that is occurring there.
Okay. So
and he might have developed collaterals, because of which his treadmill test is showing changes, but not very severe changes.
Okay. So this is the third opinion I'm getting now. One is strongly positive, one is mildly positive, borderline positive, and another gentleman is saying now it is we have to be careful. Its history is suggestive of angina, and therefore this must be. Then in that case, what is your interpretation of treadmill?
Sir, that's what, sir. The thing is, his HbA1c is also 7.6 on the blood test. That means his sugar is uncontrolled for at least a minimum of 3 months, and we don't know how long he's been diabetic. So symptoms might not always be there, sir.
Yeah, sure, but diabetes does not affect the interpretation of the treadmill. So don't bring that here. Don't bring that.
So I think a treadmill has a sensitivity and specificity of 70 to 80%, sir.
Okay.
So you can't totally rely upon the treadmill in such a condition where there is query history of angina and ischemic preconditioning.
Okay. So we'll see. We'll remember your point that you are the third opinion. Very good. So now, what is your comment about extent of coronary artery disease or severity of ischemia?
So triple vessel disease.
Oh, you want to comment triple vessel disease? What is the evidence of triple vessel disease?
Sir, AVR STT changes along with even inferior, and probably he's having collaterals, which I feel, because he has to stop for a few minutes and then he recovers. So maybe he's having either a CTO somewhere in the LAD or diffuse triple vessel disease with collaterals, sir. I'm not quite sure about that.
Can I give you a piece of advice?
Yes, sir.
Don't go into details of coronary angiogram from treadmill.
Yes,
See,
sir. Okay.
CTO and three vessel disease and this thing and that. You can only say mild ischemia, severe ischemia. Don't talk
Sure.
about as if you've seen the coronary angiogram, three vessel and left main and those. That is too much of over diagnosis.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Sorry, sir.
Okay.
No, sir, I'm just trying to imagine from what.
Yeah, I
Sorry, sir.
understand. We only say mild ischemia or severe ischemia. That is
Severe
all.
ischemia.
Okay.
Severe ischemia.
So you feel it is severe ischemia.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. But severe ischemia based on his history, not on anything else.
The history, HbA1c and
So again,
STD.
you are bringing HbA1c. HbA1c has nothing to do with treadmill positive.
Yes, sir.
HbA1c only predisposes to coronary artery disease.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So don't bring in HbA1c in here.
Yes.
I take your point about the chest pain and all that, but
Yes, sir. Okay.
don't diagnose too much now. Okay.
Okay, sir. Sorry, sir.
Okay. Have you people heard of Duke treadmill score? Anybody? Quick.
Yes, sir.
Yes. What is it?
Yes, sir. Exercise duration -5 into ST deviation -4 into angina index.
Okay. So this is reported routinely in all treadmill reports. All the computerized treadmill machines give this report routinely. Do you people look at it? Yeah, better look at it, no? Because somebody's done it. So you're right. Exercise time -5 into ST depression, -4 into angina score. In this patient, I calculated the score as 7. So what does it mean? That is 12 minutes exercise -5, 7. The ST depression of 1 millimeter, 7. Angina was not there, so 0. So score is 7. Good.
7 is a low risk.
It divides into
low risk groups.
low risk, moderate risk, and high risk.
Yes, sir. So it comes in low risk, sir. More than 5 it is.
Yes. More than 5 is low. You're right. Very good. Low risk is more than 5. Less than -10 is high risk. Between 4 to -10 is intermediate risk. So according to Duke treadmill score, this patient is a low risk patient. Okay. A good effort tolerance. ST segmentation not severe, not prolonged, no symptoms, and Duke treadmill score is, I think. Okay. Now there are many clues to prognosis in treadmill. No, you must be aware of this. Just a quick discussion: how much exercise time is done? Whether he had angina during treadmill exercise? What's the maximum ST depression? When did the ST depression start? And this patient started in the stage 3. The shape of the ST depression, downsloping or horizontal, is more important than upsloping. And what is the resting ECG? If the resting ECG is abnormal, then the exercise changes are not very diagnostic, because resting ECG is a confounding factor. So if the resting ECG is abnormal, then the treadmill is not very useful. How long the ST changes last, BP response, whether it rises as expected, and if he has significant ventricular arrhythmia. Now looking at all these criteria, where would you put this patient? Low risk or high risk?
So
Low risk. Low risk.
Low risk.
Yeah, it looks all not a single point in low risk patient. Okay. So what is your opinion now? What should you do next? What is your opinion about CAD? Well, that we have already talked. Some of you feel that coronary artery disease is there, but it's very mild. Other people feel that it may be severe. One person feels, not other people. Only one person feels it's severe coronary artery disease. Then risk category, almost everybody agrees that it is a low risk category, except that one gentleman who said it was severe coronary artery disease. And now what is your advice? Because he wants to continue running. That is the main reason he went for master health checkup.
We should look for his...
No, one person, please. One person.
We should look for his lipid profile and see for other risk factors like smoking and hypertension, family history.
I'll tell you. He is not a hypertensive. He is not a smoker. And his lipid profile, I told you, in fact, very mild. Cholesterol about 170, total cholesterol, LDL about 120.
Sir, since the patient is in low risk category, sir, we can go for a CT coronary angio, sir.
Okay, one person said CT coronary angio you want to do. That is a non-invasive test for assessing coronary angio. Okay. Any other opinions? Okay, so everybody seems to agree that chorangioma. Now, somebody talked about sensitivity and specificity. Yeah, that's an important aspect of interpreting. I hope all of you are familiar with this. It's a little confusing to begin with, but I think it's very important as cardiologists to understand sensitivity and specificity. Yeah. Now, sensitivity is a term used to indicate the percentage of the. In this case, we are only talking about treadmill. We are not talking about any other diagnostic test. Okay, the percentage of positive tests among all patients with CAD. Suppose you have 100 patients with CAD and you do treadmill in everybody, how many of them will be positive? Okay. Now, specificity on the other hand, if you test 100 normal patients, how many of them will be negative? Okay. So, this is ability to find coronary artery abnormal pattern in abnormal patients. This is ability to find a normal pattern in normal patients, right? Now, for a long time, sensitivity and specificity was the one which is used for interpreting treadmill, and obviously you want a perfect test. You want a 100% sensitivity, 100% specificity, but you can't have that because whatever factor you use to increase sensitivity will reduce specificity. I'll tell you an example. For example, sensitivity, instead of using 1 millimeter ST depression, which detects only about 80% of coronary artery disease, you say no, from now onwards I will take 0.5 millimeter ST depression as positive. You reduce the criteria for positivity. In that case, the sensitivity will increase from 80%, it will become 95%. But what will happen? You will start diagnosing many normal people as coronary artery disease. That is, the moment you increase sensitivity, the specificity will go down. Okay, that means they're both sort of reciprocally related. Now, the other important thing is sensitivity and specificity helps you only in a group of patients. Like out of all coronary artery disease patients, treadmill will detect in 80% of people abnormal result. Out of all normal people, treadmill will detect normal results in about 80% of the people. Now, this is not what we are interested in. We are interested in our army man. We are interested in one patient. We are not interested in a group of coronary artery disease patients. We are not interested in normal patients, a group. We are interested in one single patient who has come and asked our opinion, the army man. So in this case, I want to know how significant this treadmill is. So you need some new criteria. Sensitivity and specificity doesn't help you there. You understand? That's a very important concept. You must understand. Now, by and large, somebody said in the group, and you're right, that treadmill does not have a sensitivity of more than 70 to 80%. That means if you do treadmill in all patients with coronary artery disease, it will be positive only about 80 to 85% of cases. There will be about 10-15% of cases with coronary artery disease in whom the treadmill may be normal. Similarly, specificity, if you do 100 normal people, specificity, a normal treadmill will be seen in about 85%, but 10 to 15% may show an abnormal treadmill, false positive test. That's why it's called, the TP means true positive, this is false negative, true negative, and false positive. All of you are familiar with this formula?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Right. So this is not enough. No, this doesn't help our single patient. No, this is not a population study where sensitivity and you say, okay, guys, sensitivity, but it doesn't help me in a single patient. How to interpret this fellow's result? Now the result is borderline. I don't know whether it's positive or negative. How much importance should I give to this treadmill test? I don't know. One of you said that it is very severe. Another fellow said it is very mild. I don't know how much importance to give. So we started using some other new values called predictive values. There are two predictive values. Positive predictive value, that if you have a positive test, how sure you are that it indicates coronary artery disease. Suppose you have 100 positive tests. Out of them, how many are true positive? And the remaining will be false positive. So positive predictive value is the true positive, that is positive in coronary artery disease, divided by the total number of positive tests. That means it is a measure of how well it diagnoses disease. Another term also used called the post-test probability of the disease. Now, the positive predictive value is very high, about 95%. So if you have a positive treadmill in a particular patient, it means there is 95% chance that this fellow has coronary artery disease. Okay. Negative predictive value, how well it rules out disease. Now, it's a true negative divided by all negatives. Now, what does it say? If you have a negative predictive value of 80%, and then one patient comes with a negative treadmill, you know that 80% chance this fellow will not have coronary artery disease. But there's still a 20% chance that he may have coronary artery disease. You got it? So, this sensitivity and specificity applies to groups of patients and assessment of the test in a group of patients, whereas to an individual patient, the predictive values are more helpful, and particularly the positive predictive value. That is, if I have a positive test in a given person, what does it mean? Does it mean that he is very likely that he has coronary artery disease, or the chances are very little? Now, which is more helpful clinically? Let's see. Now, this is the table between the two, and I hope you're familiar with this table. There's a 2x2 table. Now, the gold standard is usually a coronary angiogram. So, the coronary artery disease present, coronary artery disease absent. Treadmill test positive, treadmill test negative. So, we have true positive and false positive, false negative and true negative. Okay. So, the percentage true positive divided by all positives is sensitivity. True negative divided by all negative coronary artery disease is specificity. But positive predictive value is true positive out of all positive treadmills. That is what tells you the percentage probability of coronary artery disease in a given patient. So probably we should use first positive predictive value. Now, does the positive predictive value work in every patient? Can somebody answer that? Is there any limitation of positive predictive value? Okay. Have you people heard of it?
Pretest probability, sir.
Yes, very good. What does pretest probability mean?
The pretest probability in this will be intermediate because patient had a history of angina and 67-year-old male patient. So if it is intermediate probability,
What exactly you mean pretest probability?
It depends on
the prevalence of the disease. So, right, please. Okay. So, Bayes' theorem says, now you may get a short note on Bayes' theorem, you may get a short note on sensitivity, specificity, predictive value. Any one of these can be a question in the examination, and of course in real life. Predictive value of any test depends upon the prevalence of the disease in that population. That means, if you're doing a test in a group of people where many of the people are diseased, it has a different predictive value. Whereas if you do in another group of people where the disease is very rare, the same test will have a different predictive value. It's also called the pretest probability of it. I'll show you an example. So here we have a data set. Now we have a group of people in whom the prevalence of coronary artery disease is very, very high. Maybe elderly, diabetic, hypertensive, with strong family history and everything, very high family history. In fact, and it's called a high prevalence group. And I got another group here, which is a low prevalence group. So this is a group of relatively healthy people, well-trained athletes, and in whom the probability of coronary artery disease is less than 5%. So I got two data sets here. We'll be doing the same treadmill test which has the same sensitivity and specificity. Now, sensitivity specificity depends also on the criteria that you're using. How many millimeter depression, what protocol you're using, okay, and all those things. So therefore, we are using a same test, the same sensitivity and specificity in two groups of patients, in high prevalence and a low prevalence group, right? Now, let us check this patient, the high prevalence group. We are testing 10,000 patients, and out of whom 9,500, that is 95% of people have coronary artery disease. Okay. Now, sensitivity is 93% and specificity is 80%. That is average for about a treadmill test. Okay. So, how did we arrive at sensitivity? True positives upon all coronary artery disease, 93%. How did we arrive at specificity? True negatives divided by all normal people, that is 93 and 80%. Okay. So, now this doesn't help you to say whether this patient is covered. So we have to do the predictive values. When you do the predictive values, you find that if you have a positive predictive value here, 8,835 divided by the total number of positive tests, 8,900. Because the prevalence is 95%, the positive predictive value of a treadmill test in this patient is almost 99%. Okay. That means if a patient comes from a society where coronary artery disease is very highly prevalent and he has a positive treadmill, it's almost certain that this treadmill is a true positive. On the other hand, if he comes with a negative treadmill, true negative divided by all negative, that means 400 divided by 1065, the total negative test. We get a negative predictive value of 37%. That means a negative predictive value has a very, very low percentage. That means in a high prevalence group, a positive test is a definite indicator of disease, whereas a negative test does not rule out disease, because there is another 63% of people who may have negative treadmill and still have coronary artery disease in that particular population. You understand how predictive value is different from sensitivity? Okay.
Yes.
In sensitivity and specificity, you are evaluating the test. In predictive value, you are evaluating the result in the single individual patient. Okay, so this is a high prevalence group. Now let's go to another group of patients who have a very low prevalence. Now here, how much is the prevalence here? Only 500 patients have coronary artery disease out of 10,000 patients. That is 5%. 95% are normal. Okay. And again, the same treadmill we are using, the same sensitivity, 93%, same specificity, 80%. Everything is same. The only thing which has changed is the prevalence of the disease. Okay. So when you do that, what happens to the predictive value? Now look at the positive predictive value. Positive predictive value is 465 divided by all positives, 2365 is 20%. So the predictive value is now down to 20%. So in a low prevalence group, like a healthy group of people, you are doing routine screening. If you do treadmill and you find a positive test, there is 80% chance it's a false positive test, and only 20% chance that this patient has a coronary artery disease. Yes, agreed. On the other hand, in a low prevalence category, if you have a negative treadmill, that means true negative divided by all negative, you get 99% negative predictive value. That means in a low prevalence group, if you have a negative test, you can be 100% certain or 99% certain that this fellow's coronary arteries are not diseased. So you see, what I have tried to show you is the predictive value of a test in a particular patient depends upon the prevalence of the disease in that population. Now, where will we go for knowing the prevalence of a disease? Well, there are literature available in Indian population of 60 to 80 years. What is the incident prevalence of coronary? There may be literature, and or you may have in Americans of 70 to 90 years old. What is the prevalence of coronary? There are published data. But more important than that is your clinical sense. You have taken a history, you have assessed the patient, and therefore you must form an idea of what is the likely pre-test probability of coronary artery disease in this patient. Okay, that's the most important. Prevalence can be, one is from the literature. Prevalence can also be judged by your own assessment of the patient from history and your initial assessment. You got this? How predictive value changes with prevalence of the disease is very, very important concept. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes.
So now, so based on this disease, one of you said you want to do a CT angio. Another person, nobody said. I think that's the only answer I got. The alternative, you can do a perfusion scintigraphy, you can do CT angio, you can do a exercise echocardiography, you can, so many tests are available to assess ischemia. Now, let us go back to our patient again. Now, only one person said correctly that this person's history is very, very suggestive of angina. Remember, he is an army man, very fit person. He's been running for years and years, and he's very motivated to run. And then he says heaviness of chest on running. The only unusual feature, he slows down and stops for 1 or 2 minutes, and then he continues his run. That's the only feature. But otherwise, something has happened in the last few weeks, because he is not a person who is going to get psychological pain and come to you. He wants to run 20 kilometers every day. So I think we have to pay attention to this symptom. Now, secondly, what is your assessment of pre-test probability of disease in this patient? Now, somebody said intermediate probability. I disagree. I think it's a very, very high probability. If you go through the literature on the probability of coronary artery disease in 60 to 80-year age group, and especially if he is a diabetic, and the prevalence of coronary artery disease should be in the range of 60 to 70%. So, according to published literature, coronary artery disease can be present in up to 50 to 70% of people above the age of 60 years. 1. 2. This patient's symptoms look genuine. Retrosternal heaviness, starts on running, reduces on exercise, but continues. And why is able to continue, we will discuss that separately. It seems to be important. Thirdly, I think he is a high risk category. He is a diabetic. He is 68 years. He has new onset symptoms. Any new onset chest symptoms in the last 6 to 8 weeks is considered as an unstable situation. And therefore, I would consider this probability of coronary artery disease in this patient to be a high probability. I do not agree with small probability or intermediate probability. Agreed?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Therefore, now we have to interpret his treadmill in the view of our assessment. My assessment is, look, this fellow is a very reliable person. He's giving a good history. He has got risk factors. He is in the age group for coronary artery disease. And therefore, I would place that the probability of coronary artery disease is high. Okay. So my advice would be not to do any non-invasive test. I would go straight for an invasive test. What's the great point in doing CT angio, and then after the CT angio, you will come back and do coronary angio. You will do scintigraphy, and then you will come back to do coronary angio. You will do stress echocardiography, and then you will come back to coronary angio. I think the next step would be to directly to coronary angio, because that tells me not only the presence or absence of disease, it also tells me the severity of the disease at the same time. It also gives me a plan for management. Therefore, my advice would be to straight go for coronary angiography. In fact, I have, that's strongly my advice. I don't think there's any need to do any more non-invasive tests. But let's see a more any other advice for him other than that? Of course, you would advise whatever you want to advise for coronary artery disease and so on. Now, this patient had a coronary angiography on our advice, and this is what he had. He had a tight proximal LAD disease. He had moderate disease in the left circumflex artery, which was non-dominant, but the main lesion was a tight proximal LAD disease. Okay. Now, there are some important messages from it. First of all, somebody started diagnosing 3-vessel disease and all that. That the ECG and treadmill, particularly the treadmill, is not a good guide to localization of coronary artery disease. Please never try to assess the location of the coronary artery disease from the treadmill, because here the leads are not placed in the classical lead position. They are placed in modified position for the treadmill. And secondly, the pattern would change if it is multivessel disease. It would not truly reflect the location of the disease. Right? Okay. Now, what is the pattern of his symptoms called? What is this called? He starts walking, gets pain, slows down, wait for 1 minute, and then again runs for 20 kilometers. What is it called?
Warm-up angina.
Warm-up angina.
It is called walk-through angina. Walk-through angina. That means you exert and then you continue. Well, warm-up angina is another name. I agree. Agreed. So can anybody tell me what is the mechanism of warm-up angina? The first important thing in this patient is to acknowledge that he has angina. That I think none of you commented on that. No, everybody started straight interpreting the treadmill. See, I wanted you to make a comment on the history. His history is so clear, so classical of walk-through angina warm-up. You should have made a comment when I asked you what is the plan. So the various mechanisms of walk-through angina or warm-up angina have been said. One is recruitment of collateral flow. You start exercise and then the collaterals take a while to dilate, and then it starts compensating. Ischemic preconditioning. Somebody said preconditioning. Can you explain to me what is preconditioning? Who said that? Who said preconditioning?
Sir, basically, when the patient is, when there are moderate lesions, and over a period of time, since the patient has a history of continuous exercise and walking, the body.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean, but you're beating around the bush. You have to define what is ischemic preconditioning. Does anybody else want to try?
Remote ischemia in the pre-infarct period, sir, can remote ischemia given can protect the precordium from the.
These are all applications you are telling me. That's not the see, ischemic preconditioning.
Like sir, we do.
When a tissue is subject to ischemia for a temporary period, it improves the ability of the tissue to withstand longer periods of ischemia. Okay? If you keep on producing small periods of ischemia, the tissue becomes resistant to ischemia. It is able to tolerate ischemia for a longer time. That is what is preconditioning. So in this patient, he walks and gets angina, the tissue is ischemic. And then after some time, he again starts exerting. By the time the ischemic tissue is able to tolerate the ischemia. Got it? Now this is used in many places, like in PTCA. You know that when you are going to inflate the balloon for a long time, the patient is going to get severe pain. So you do many small inflation for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. And then you go and inflate complete 1 minute. So that prepares the myocardium to withstand the ischemia. Similarly, if the patient is having recurrent chronic angina, then when the artery occludes, the ischemia will be better tolerated. The amount of ischemic damage will be less. In surgery, it is used. In surgery, if you again, when you produce ischemia in the during the process, it stands the ischemia during cardiopulmonary bypass better. So this is called ischemic preconditioning. You must read up about it, and you must be able to write a page on ischemic preconditioning if somebody asks you. And of course, finally, some cases of walk-through angina may be spasm. Maybe at the beginning of exercise, they had spasm which got relieved. Okay. So now based on this test, in this patient, there are some important points that you must know. The selection of a test for any disease depends upon the history, whether you think the history is significant or not. Then, because based on the history only and with the treadmill, I now decide coronary angiography is better than CT angio. So you must choose a test according to the thing. Exercise capacity, you can't do treadmill in, like last week's case, somebody said he will do treadmill in a patient with, what case did we discuss?
Arthritis.
Yeah, knee joint arthritis. Now, how can you do exercise test in a patient with knee joint arthritis? Okay, and the ability to tolerate that. And of course, important pre-test probability of coronary artery disease. So my assessment in this patient was high pre-test probability. Now, among all the tests for coronary artery disease, treadmill has the least predictive accuracy, least ability to quantify ischemia and coronary artery disease. Therefore, don't talk of severity of coronary artery disease from treadmill alone as much as possible, unless some conditions are fulfilled. Now, always remember TME is unreliable if the resting ECG is abnormal. These are all very, very important points. If you have a LVH with stress, ST depression already in the resting ECG, please don't try to interpret a treadmill. If patient has left bundle branch block, don't try to interpret treadmill test. Okay. Now, some more important points about treadmill exercise. Now, treadmill is the best test because it's easily done, non-invasive, available everywhere. It is the best test for low pre-test probability. That means, like when you're screening thousands employees of the army, you want to test them. So, screening test, treadmill is one of the best tests for low pre-test probability. In the low pre-test probability, if you do a test, the chances of false negative are very, very low. False negative test, I showed you already in the previous analysis, no? The negative, the chances of false negative are very, very low. Positive predictive value is very high, and therefore, the false negative is very low. Therefore, if you get a negative test, it is very likely to be correct. If you get a negative test in a low prevalence group, that is the final answer. There's no need to do any more tests like CT angio or anything. But if you get a positive test in a low prevalence group, do not accept it. It will be very, very suspicious. A positive test is very likely to be a false positive test. In that case, don't go straight for coronary angio because your TMT is positive. You do screening on a college athlete and you get ST depression. Please don't advise CT angio or coronary angio because it's a positive test in a low prevalence patient. Very likely it falls positive. Therefore, go back to the history or do some non-invasive test like CT angio or some other simple test. Suppose you have a patient like a high pre-test probability, like our patient. If you get a positive test, like our patient, a false positive is very, very unlikely. False positive, very unlikely. Therefore, there is no need to do for any more non-invasive tests. If a positive test occurs in a high pre-test probability, it's very likely it's a significant test. Please go straight for quantification of coronary artery disease. Do not waste time, do not spend money on another unnecessary test. But in a group who has a high prevalence, if you get a negative test, again be very, very careful. So our patient, if he had tested positive, I think it's a significant test, I would go for coronary angiogram. But if he had tested negative, I would ignore the treadmill test and I would still go for further testing for coronary artery disease. So if you have a positive test, accept it and go for coronary angiogram. If you have a negative test in a high pre-test probability, be very careful. This may be a false negative test. Do not ignore it. Therefore, do some more tests to confirm or quantify coronary artery disease. This point is very important. Okay. Please remember.
Yes.
Please remember, in a high prevalence group, a negative TMT does not rule out coronary artery disease. So in our patient, if the treadmill had been negative or mildly positive, I would not accept that negative TMT. I would still consider him for further investigation. Because in this category, false negatives are very likely. If you get a negative test, be very suspicious. You understood this point?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes.
Right. So that's the end of case 1. Any questions on that?
So
Yes,
in
sir.
high probability, pretest probability patients, sir, is it okay if we do an angiogram directly instead of doing a TMT first?
Yes. If you have a patient of 68-year-old diabetes comes with a classical history of angina,
Yes, sir.
he walks 100 feet and gets angina, I don't think there's any need for a treadmill. I
Yes,
think
sir.
you can go straight to coronary angio because you are convinced about his history. You're convinced about it. I think there's no harm. You can avoid a treadmill altogether. Yes. But
Yes, sir.
people still do treadmill because for various reasons. One, they want to document for many reasons, for insurance purposes, for medical legal purposes, and so on and so forth. One, two, for prognostication, whether this thing, whether he walked less than 6 meters, more than 6 meters, and so to justify their own this thing. But otherwise, if your pretest possibility is very high, I think there's no need to do any treadmill. You can go straight for coronary angio.
Okay.
Now, the other thing I wanted to tell you is there are some indicators of severe coronary artery disease like extensive ST depression, marked ST depression,
Less than 5 minutes.
prolonged ST depression, fall of blood pressure, and all. They indicate that a patient has severe coronary artery disease, maybe 3 vessel, maybe extensive disease, maybe left main disease, and all that. Okay. Now, please remember that if these poor prognostic signs are present, they are very helpful. They indicate extensive disease. But if they are absent, they do not rule out extensive disease. Now, this is a very important point you should understand. If poor prognostic signs are present, they are very helpful. It indicates severe coronary artery disease. But if you have no poor prognostic sign, it does not mean that he doesn't have left main disease. He could still have left main disease. You understood? Please be careful. They all rule out, they do not rule out any severe disease. They only confirm when they are there. So now our patient, for example, we thought he's a high probability case. He has a classical history of angina and he has borderline positive or positive treatment. Now, but he had no low risk indicators. But on the other hand, when we did a coronary angio, he had a very large type 3 LAD with a proximal tight lesion in the LAD. Now, proximal tight LAD in a type 3 LAD supplies 65 to 70% of the left ventricular myocardium. That is severe coronary artery disease. Okay? So, absence of severe signs does not rule out severe coronary artery disease. Got it?
Oh, okay, sir. Some doubts were there, sir.
Yes.
Sir, if we take that angina out of question, sir, and if it was like a atypical angina or symptoms are vague, what would be our next strategy, sir? Should we go out CT angio?
Okay, if angina is negative, it doesn't change much for this patient. So I still put him in a high risk category because he is 68-year-old, he has diabetes, and therefore I think in the probability of coronary artery disease in him is almost 70%. I think he is a high prevalence group anyway.
Okay, sir.
So okay. It's a good thing you did a treadmill. If he has no convincing angina, treadmill is a must. But after that, you can decide whether you want to do non-invasive test or suppose he had no history of angina and his treadmill is also negative. Then you can think, okay, he's 68-year-old high prevalence patient, but still he has a negative treadmill. Then I might go for one more non-invasive test.
Sir, I have a question, sir, if you allow,
Yes.
sir. Sir, in case this patient has already walked 12 minutes on the treadmill, sir, what would be the improvement, whether we would gain anything by revascularizing this LED, sir?
Oh,
This
come
is my
on.
question.
That's a very bad question. I'm sorry to say that, but it's a very bad question. Left proximal LED disease is a life-threatening. It's called the widowmaker's disease. It's a life-threatening lesion. It's a lesion which, if it thromboses, it will destroy 70% of the left ventricle. Therefore, that the idea of treatment is not only to improve effort tolerance, but improve his survival. Proximal LAD,
Okay, sir.
proximal three vessel disease, left main are different categories, Baba. If you had a mid LAD disease, I would agree with your question. No, don't mind my telling bad question. I'm just trying to emphasize.
Sir.
No, please
No,
don't.
sir,
I'm not trying to make fun of you. Please don't mistake me at all. I'm sorry if I did that. But why I said that was I want to emphasize in everybody's mind. No, now you will remember for rest of your life. That's why I said that. Okay. Proximal LAD disease, never talk about effort tolerance alone. Effort tolerance plus survival. Agreed?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Agreed.
Yes.
Good. I like you asking questions. Please don't mind my statement. You must ask questions.
Sir, this one doubt, sir. Sorry, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, with this recent ischemia trial, sir, would you give full medical management first before attempting plasty or direct plasty, sir?
Look, I am not going into that now. This was for if you remember, mine was clinical. I'm not taking an intervention class for you. Please. Yes, I'm not going into that at the moment. We can discuss it in a separate sitting.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, this is a clinical challenge.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, next case. Case number 2. Okay, a different set of people should answer now, please. Not the same people again and again. Okay, 52-year-old male smoker, heavy smoker, but he's been well till 10 days ago. And since last 10 days, he is very tired, unable to climb to his flat. His flat is on the 3rd floor. He's not able to climb. Initially, he couldn't climb to his flat. Over the next few days, he had increasing cough and exertional dyspnea. He had loss of appetite also. For the past 2 days, he has fever and blood-tinged sputum. He has hypertension on drugs, controlled, diabetes on drugs, controlled, no improvement with cough syrups. Okay, have you registered the history? Shall I go to the next slide? 10 days history, tiredness, inability to climb, increasing cough, dyspnea, loss of appetite, fever, blood-tinged sputum. Okay, next slide. So he came to you because you were on duty on the 1st of April this year. He was sick, anxious. He was sitting in bed. He was sweating. His temperature was 37.8 degrees. He had a, by the way, I forgot to tell you, initially, yes, did I say fever? Oh yeah, I told you. For the past 2 days he had fever, correct. Okay. So his temperature of 37.8, tachycardic, BP normal, saturation 90%, brisk pulses, JVP is normal, no edema, no hepatomegaly, labored breathing, scattered rhonchi and a few crepitations. That's a harsh, not harsh, sorry, 3/6 ejection systolic murmur at the upper right sternal border and upper left sternal border, both the upper sternal border. And when you are 90%, then ICU nurse put on oxygen, and the pulse oximetry on oxygen was 10 liters per minute, was 93%. Right. So that's the story. The cardiology, as a senior registrar or a consultant, you're there. What do you want next?
Sir, if he's
Hey, are you the same person who answered earlier?
Yes, sir.
No, sorry. Somebody else should answer. Hello, anybody? Come on, quick. We are already 3 o'clock. Otherwise, I'll have to cut short the meeting.
Sir, ECG X-ray will be next.
Okay, I'll give you the ECG. Okay, interpret the ECG, please. Quick. Hey, come on, don't take so much time. Nothing much in the ECG. There's sinus tachycardia. Nothing.
Tachycardia, sir.
There's what is the axis?
Axis is 0 left. 1 and AVL is positive. 0 to 30 degrees.
Yeah, mild left deviation.
Yes.
No clear right ventricular hypertrophy, left ventricular. Don't take so much time. No? This ECG is very unproductive, and he is in sinus rhythm. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that is his X-ray. 2 X-rays were taken, maybe 1 or 2 days apart.
Sir, may I just interrupt, please?
Yes, sure.
Sir, the ECG showed ST depressions of up to 1.5 mm in anterior precordial leads.
Where?
Should we
where
get posterior leads first?
Don't I? Which lead you mean? This one?
Sir, V1 to V3.
V1, no. V1 there is no ST depression. V2 and V3 there is some ST depression, I agree. But V1 there is no ST depression. PR segment is here and ST is here. So, you think this is important?
Sir, it could be possible with his clinical presentation, sir.
No. Don't tell me it could be and all. Anything could be.
I mean,
what do you think is abnormality? Tell me. You think of ischemic heart disease, anti-wall infarction.
I'm considering a posterior wall MI as a possibility, sir.
Posterior wall MI should have a tall T wave, increasing heights of R wave. Where are the posterior wall signs? And
It could be an.
And here 10 days history of dyspnea, cough. I mean, okay, we'll remember this. We say some vague ST depression V2, V3, which I thought was non-specific, but one of you thinks it is posterior wall infarction, possible. Yes? Okay, next. That is his X-ray. Come on, quick.
X-ray showing ground glass appearance, sir.
Ground glass appearance. Okay.
Haziness.
What is ground glass appearance? I don't understand.
Haziness of the lung surface.
Pulmonary venous hypertension on the right side. Can you describe it if you do? I don't understand what you're saying.
Sir, there are curly lines and also signs of alveolar edema, sir. More on right compared to the left, sir. And the right side X-ray shows left pleural effusion also.
Okay, you're, I think, clever. You're looking at all the arrows and telling me. But I have some. Okay.
Straightening of the left quarter of the heart is also seen.
Okay. I think you guys are not interpreting X-ray like a cardiologist. No? First and foremost, we never talked about cardiac size. Going straight to pulmonary edema.
No.
Is the heart enlarged or not?
No, sir.
Hello?
No, sir. No,
sir.
No, sir. CTRA. Any chambers are enlarged?
Right atrial enlargement is seen.
Left atrial appendage.
Left atrial. Did you say right atrial or left atrial? What did you say first?
Left atrial appendage.
Why do you say left atrial appendage? The rest tightening of the border, you mean? Okay.
Yes, sir. Right atrium is also enlarged, sir.
Okay. But heart size is not enlarged. So now we got a very dense opacity in the right upper zone here with something which looks like a air bronchogram or something like that, but you can't make out clearly. Left lung is surprisingly clear. So some of you feel that it is pulmonary edema, but then why is it more on one side? Pulmonary edema occurs in one lung?
Excuse me, sir.
Hello?
Sorry. Hello, sir.
Hey, one person.
Sir, if you're taking his history and these findings, and the fact that, sir, you said he came on 1st of April of this year, I would consider the ongoing coronavirus pandemic.
Wonderful. Good. At least you noticed the date I told you. Wonderful. Yes, agreed. He may be corona also. But then everybody in April need not be corona. Please don't. But yeah, agreed. I think I would keep corona in mind. Yes. So this is a very dense opacity starting very close to the hilum, but not quite extending up to the pleural surface, and more in the upper zone than in the lower zone. And typically, pulmonary edema we always thought would be the veins would be more prominent here, but the edema part would be more in the mid and lower zones, isn't it? But yes, something unusual going on here. So one registrar thought it may be atypical pneumonia. Another person thought that maybe this X-ray can be a differential diagnosis. Many conditions. Do you want me to give you a differential diagnosis? I know you can't make one diagnosis. Differential diagnosis. It could be. I'll tell you all the differential diagnoses. You tell me which one would you consider first. These are all the possible conditions. No, it could be just a plain and simple lobar pneumonia, pneumococcal pneumonia. It could be a atypical pneumonia. It could be a COVID pneumonia. It could be pulmonary embolism. It could be pulmonary edema. It could be pulmonary hemorrhage. It could be acute respiratory distress syndrome. Now tell me why it is not lobar pneumonia. Quick. No, we are taking too much time. Then we won't be able to see the echo and all that. See, lobar pneumonia is always maximum at the periphery. It comes often, it's maximum at the periphery and it occupies the zone of a lobe. Now, this one is occupying part of a lobe. It's not even occupying the whole of the right upper lobe. It's starting from the hilum, it's not extending to the lobe. Lobar pneumonia always occupies the periphery much more, and then you see clear air bronchograms in that. Can this be a COVID pneumonia? Somebody said COVID pneumonia. Have you seen an X-ray of COVID pneumonia? You better look it up if you haven't seen one, because you are taking exam in June, July. COVID is very likely to be around still. What is the X-ray picture of COVID pneumonia?
Diffuse bilateral pulmonary infiltrates along with ground glass appearance, GGOs. And there can be atelectasis along with effusions and collapse of the.
But where? Where in the lung?
The more peripheral.
Perihilar.
No, not perihilar. Okay, can this be pulmonary infarction? Can this be pulmonary infarction?
Unlikely, sir. The pulmonary infarction usually gives a wedge-shaped opacity towards the periphery.
Pulmonary infarctions have got many features, but none of them are very diagnostic and not very frequently seen. The most common ones are streaky shadows in the lung or wedge-shaped infarcts. But if you are, and secondly, such a large opacity cannot be pulmonary infarct. But such a large area of infarct means the patient would not be able to sit up and talk to you. One. Secondly, again, pulmonary infarct like pneumonia always starts from the periphery. If you have an occlusion here, the ischemia is always at the distalmost end of the artery. Right? So the infarct will always be at the periphery here. So the pulmonary, can this be ARDS? Acute respiratory distress syndrome due to some insult, poisonous gas, something. See, ARDS means both lungs are involved diffusely. Both lungs should be involved. If you can't have one lung involved more than the other lung. ARDS is a bilateral disease. No, unless the bilateral disease, you cannot do that. Okay. So, so it doesn't fit with any of them. Pneumonia, it doesn't fit. Atypical pneumonia, COVID pneumonia. I tell you why it doesn't fit COVID pneumonia very soon. Pulmonary embolism, it doesn't fit. Pulmonary edema, again, more on one side. Pulmonary hemorrhage. Yes, pulmonary hemorrhage can be unilateral. So wherever it bleeds, that area will become opaque. ARD is quite unlikely. I'll show you some classical. Now, this is the X-ray of this patient. Okay. Now, somebody called this pulmonary edema, but pulmonary edema this is classical pulmonary edema, where a butterfly shadow starts from the hilum and fans out on both the sides toward him. It starts hilum, and the hilar area is completely hazy with loss of definition of the arterial outlines here. So you cannot make out the arterial outlines here. So this is classical pulmonary edema. Now, if this is pulmonary edema, it has to be unilateral pulmonary edema or asymmetrical pulmonary edema. Now, there are a few conditions where asymmetrical pulmonary edema can happen, but they are uncommon. Okay. Now, these are some other X-rays which you have to understand. Now, this is a typical X-ray of a COVID pneumonia. They affect mainly the periphery of the disease, periphery of the lung, and more so in the lower lobe, middle and lower zone. They do not affect the perihilar region. Somebody amongst you said perihilar. They affect the lower zone and middle zone of the periphery on either side. And even if they affect the upper lobe, they go along the periphery like this. But they are not in the pattern of a lobar. They are not in lobar distribution. This is the lobar distribution. One lobar, one segment, or one that's the lobar or a segmental distribution. Very sharp borders, one lobar. Whereas this is peripheral involvement extending across lobes. Now, this is a COVID pneumonia. This is a classical lobar pneumonia or segmental pneumonia. This is respiratory distress syndrome, bilateral, haziness, nodular shadows, streaking, vessels, everything wrong, but it's bilateral extensive. And of course, this is again pulmonary, well, this is actually interstitial lung disease. You see multiple nodularities here. Can you see this? Multiple nodularities in both the lungs. You can make out the outline of the vessel. So this is not pulmonary edema. Pulmonary edema would be, you will not be able to make out the individual vessels like this. Here there are multiple nodularities, interstitial infiltration of the lung. I don't know with what, lymphangiectasis or hemosiderosis, whatever it is, interstitial disease of the lung, multiple nodular. So you see each X-ray has a difficult picture, but definitely our patient is not COVID. The COVID X-ray is distinctly different. Because if you have doubts, what investigation do you do to look for COVID?
CT scans.
Yes, not simple CT scan, man. High resolution CT scan.
HRCT test.
Yeah. Okay, other tests in this patient are WBC count elevated, poly is elevated. Otherwise, blood tests were essentially otherwise normal, but polys were elevated. Good. So some acute phase reaction in the blood counts. Okay. So what next?
You'll have to start broad spectrum antibiotic and antiviral.
Okay. The referring doctor already started broad spectrum antibiotics. He also started azithromycin also.
Do 2D echo, sir, to rule out infected.
Anti-proBNP and 2D echo.
Which one do you want first? Because he's an ICU patient. He has come sick and he's. If you send the blood, the results will come after 1 or 2 hours. Don't you want to send the blood first? Okay, that's the blood result. Now, I want you to interpret the results. First, tell me what does the blood gases show? Nikhil, can we go beyond 3:30 for 5-10 minutes? Is it okay?
Yes, sir. You can go, sir.
Okay.
You have time, sir. A lot of time, sir. No problem, sir.
Yeah, what does the blood gas show? Come on, quick.
Metabolic acidosis, sir.
That is not wrong, but it's not completely correct also. You're not completely told the answer.
So the
Dual
PCO,
acidosis.
so it's trying to be compensated, although the bicarb is also low, so it's acidosis and it will be metabolic first and being compensated by the CO2 decrease.
So your diagnosis is uncompensated metabolic acidosis.
Yeah, sir, because the respiratory rate is high first of all, and the sepsis will itself.
No, wait a minute. I want your diagnosis. I don't want any explanation now. ABG shows what?
Some metabolic acidosis with respiratory compensation.
I'm asking you compensated metabolic acidosis.
Yes, sir.
That's what you're telling.
Yes, sir.
Okay, everybody agrees with that? Somebody differs?
Partially compensated, sir.
Very good.
Yes, sir.
If it was compensated, how will the pH be low? How will the... So, it is metabolic acidosis by low bicarb, partial compensation by low PCO2, but the compensation is only partial because the pH has dropped. Okay, so partially compensated metabolic acidosis. Yes. What does this test indicate? Hello?
Yes, sir. D-dimer is grossly elevated, sir.
D-dimer is elevated. What?
Anti-proBNP is also elevated, but that might be due to infective component also.
Okay.
So we should strongly suspect pulmonary embolism also, sir.
LDH also is elevated.
Yes.
Troponin is also elevated.
Yes, yes.
So does it help you in any way?
It would be sepsis-induced injury, sir.
Septicemia.
Okay. 25,000 pounds.
Okay.
Can be myocarditis.
Okay. Myocarditis. You expect myocarditis with a normal heart size?
Possible, sir, in early.
Likely, no? You won't get the size of cardiomyopathy, but the heart LV has to dilate if it's myocarditis. Okay, well, now what to do? So it's a typical ICU patient, full of questions, no clear answer. Everything is deranged. BNP very high, D-dimer very high, LDH high, troponin elevated but not very high, compensated metabolic acidosis, X-ray looking very confusing. So what do you want to do next?
Echocardiogram, sir.
Echocardiogram. Okay. Let's look at the echocardiogram now. One moment. I have to get that on the screen. Give me a minute. Okay, I'm going to play the clips again and again. Okay. And are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. Now I'm going to play the echo first clip. Again playing. Again I am playing.
There seems to be flail PML, sir.
Flail mitral leaflet.
Flail PML is there, sir. Yeah.
Okay. What do you mean by flail PML?
The leaflet tips are prolapsing.
Leaflet is in leaflet faces the LA, sir?
The leaflet tip is prolapsing into the LS.
Yeah, very good. Now, but what else? Discuss the echo as a whole. No, I played 3-4 times. No? Quickly, you must look at all the.
LA is also enlarged, sir.
Yeah. Give me the full picture.
LV systolic function and diastolic function appear good, sir.
Okay. So the LA is distended.
Enlargement.
The LA is distended. You're not talking about the mitral valve qualities, movement, floppiness, calcification. See, then because the next question I'm going to ask is what type of MR it is, what type of damages. You have to give a full report. This is a long axis view of the left ventricle, parasternal long axis view showing an enlarged left atrium. The mitral valve leaflets appear to be normal in texture, no thickening, no floppiness, no calcification. The mobility of the valve seems to be normal in diastole, opening well. Okay, then in systole, what is happening? Tell me.
There is flail posterior mitral leaflets.
What do you mean by flail? Come on, explain to me.
The leaflet tip prolapses into the left atrium, sir, during systole.
I can see the leaflet tip is prolapsing into the left atrium above the AML. Therefore, it's a flail leaf. And then go downward. The LV cavity is normal in size. RV cavity is normal.
Walls look normal, sir. I mean, thickness and systolic thickening look normal. Systolic function of LV looks normal. And then RVOT, there is no evidence of RVOT enlargement either. No pericardial effusions in. No evidence. Aortic leaflets also appeared normal without any restricted movement.
Okay.
No evidence of any aortic dissection.
So now look at the color Doppler. What did it show?
Eccentric MR jet hugging the wall of the left atrium, sir, along the anterior aspect. And sir, severe MR.
Why do you say severe?
Sir, because it is an eccentric jet, sir, reaching the hugging the wall of the left atrium, reaching up to the roofs are directed towards the pulmonary veins.
A more important point for me. I'm more interested in some other point.
Sir,
severity MR. There are many criteria. I don't know whether some of you might have attended my class last week. The other group. The many criteria for MR in color Doppler. Now the length, width, and all are very useful. But one of the most important things is the narrowest point of the jet, vena contracta. If the vena contracta is big, whatever be the other criteria, the MR has to be severe. Now, can you see how wide the MR jet is? Yes.
Yes, sir.
So if I ask you why, because you have not measured any criteria for MR. So if I ask you why MR is severe, the straight answer should be vena contracta is big. And the cutoff for severity of MR is how much? Vena contracta
0.7
millimeter. Okay, so.
Sir, even flail AML also of flail leaflet also says the severe MR.
Yeah, of course, yes. But I asked you on color Doppler, no? Okay, so this is still images of the same thing. Can you see the PML everting into the LA in the apical four-chamber view? And this is the PML everting in the long axis view. And of course, this is the holosystolic signal of severe MR. What is the diagnosis now? The total diagnosis is acute MR due to flail posterior mitral leaflet, clinical diagnosis ruptured chordae or papillary muscle, asymmetrical pulmonary edema, and of course associated chest infection. What is the evidence of chest infection?
Upper lobar
Counts.
No.
Fever and
Fever.
Sir, it is the elevated counts.
Fever,
and hemoptysis.
leukocytosis. The asymmetrical pulmonary edema is one of the features of acute MR. When acute MR happens, the chordae ruptures acutely, the major caudal rupture or major papillary muscle rupture. The jet of MR may be directed into one particular pulmonary vein, or it may go into one or two particular pulmonary vein, only the pulmonary veins on the right side, or only the right upper lobe pulmonary vein. It may be directed towards that, and therefore you may get predominant pulmonary edema in one area of the lung. This is one of the causes of asymmetrical pulmonary edema. Because there are other causes like pulmonary vein obstruction on one side and all that. But if you have acutely ill patient in a previously normal patient, asymmetrical pulmonary edema, think of acute caudal rupture and acute MR. There's a chest infection, unlikely. The X-ray was not suggestive of chest infection to me because it didn't fit in with lobar pneumonia, it didn't fit in with interstitial pneumonia, it didn't fit in with COVID pneumonia, and it didn't fit in with what is that called? I mean, pulmonary tuberculosis, any other cause of chest infection. But the only evidence of chest infection I thought was the leukocytosis and poly counts. Okay, now a few slides on the theory of MR. As you all know, there are two varieties of MR. Acute MR, suddenly a huge volume goes into the LA. The LA is not distended, it's very non-compliant still, and therefore the LA pressure goes up to very high levels, and the patient develops pulmonary edema. But the LV is still normal in size. So that is a picture in our patient. Normal LV, severe MR, enlarged LA because the LA is distended, and pulmonary edema. But yet, because PML is ruptured, it is going anteriorly and possibly going straight into the right pulmonary vein, causing right-sided pulmonary edema more than left-sided pulmonary edema. Now, when the MR is chronic, the LA distance becomes soft and compliant, so the LA pressure doesn't rise much. Therefore, there is no pulmonary edema. But the LV enlarges, it gets hypertrophied and enlarged, and therefore large LA, large LV with no significant PAH is a hallmark of chronic severe MR. Now, normally acute MRs does not need cath. Echo and color Doppler is so good that nowadays we don't do cath for MR. But however, as the exam going PG, you are supposed to know some points about hemodynamic findings of acute MR. What do you see here? This tracing is not for this patient, but I'm just telling you, let us assume it is this patient. What does it show?
Prominent V waves.
Tall V waves.
Okay. So first you must say what tracing, you must tell what tracing is this. And
It's a tracing showing simultaneous ECG recording and pressure recordings of left atrium and left ventricle.
Yes.
Then the left atrial pressures, left atrial and diastolic pressures are significantly elevated, diastolic as well as systolic. There is a systolic prominent waves or V waves are very prominent, reaching
very high levels. I don't know what scale. I don't know.
It's 0 to 200 scale, sir.
But I don't know whether LA was also on the same scale. But whatever it is, I know this is something. Something is not fitting because LA pressure cannot be 200. The labeling may be wrong. Whatever it is, it's a very tall V wave, like a ventricular pressure tracing. So indicate. But is it mitral stenosis or rheumatic? Because there's no evidence of gradient here. Therefore, it is pure MR. Okay. Now sometimes these V waves become very prominent, and it can travel all. Sometimes these V waves become so prominent and they can travel all the way into the distal pulmonary arteries across the pulmonary capillary bed. So this is a withdrawal tracing from the pulmonary artery wedge into the distal pulmonary arteries. Can you see there's a V wave in wedge position? But when you come into the pulmonary artery, you still see the V wave. So sometimes in severe, acute severe MR, you may get evidence of V wave in the distal branches of the pulmonary artery. Now, this is a data set for acute MR. Now, you should be able to interpret this in examination. Examiners can give you a data set where this is how a cath report appears. No, a patient can bring you this cath report for interpretation with a run of oximetry, and here. So you must be able to quickly look at the cath report and make a diagnosis, even if you're not giving much history. The most abnormal feature, if you can see going through quickly, there is some desaturation. Probably we'll come to the reason later. Right heart pressures, mild, some pulmonary arterial hypertension is there. But the most abnormal value is the pulmonary artery wedge. Very large V waves of 40 millimeters and pulmonary artery wedge pressure in the 32. 32 means it is in the range of pulmonary edema. Now, very severely elevated pulmonary artery wedge pressure with very huge V waves. Immediately you think of mitral regurgitation, and when you have such large V waves, you think of acute mitral regurgitation. So then you can judge, because of acute mitral regurgitation, there is back pressure and pulmonary hypertension, and there is also pulmonary edema causing some desaturation. On the other hand, if you look at the data set of chronic MR, here the LA is distended, and therefore the LA pressure cannot go up very high. See, the LA pressure, PA pressure is high, but not in the pulmonary edema range, not in 30, 32, 35 and all. Still V waves are big, but not in the range of 35, 40 and all. So wedge pressure is elevated, but not in the range of pulmonary edema. Again, PA pressure mildly elevated, not very severe. So the difference between chronic MR and acute MR is less severe degrees of elevation in the V wave. There is another variety of MR called secondary MR. You know that? Secondary MR is which occurs in ischemic heart disease and cardiomyopathy where the impaired LV function, also called as organic MR, secondary functional MR, whatever. So here the main cause of MR, we'll discuss MR separately, I can't go into that, but here the main problem is the LV function. So here the V waves are not so big, A and B are not so big, but the EDP and the wedge pressures are very elevated. And of course, you must also note that the pulmonary arterial saturation is 54%. Is that normal, high or low? Pulmonary artery saturation 54.
Very low, sir.
Very low. What does it mean?
Probably increased extractions, peripheral extraction.
So what does it mean?
Low cardiac output.
Low cardiac output.
Yes.
So that's the very high LVEDP with a low cardiac output indicates poor ventricular function. And therefore, if you do cath in an MR patient and you find this sort of, not much of PAH. So very high LVEDP, V wave not very prominent. V waves will be prominent only if the ventricle can contract strongly. No, if ventricle contracts and pushes blood strongly into LA, then you get large V wave. So it cannot be very big. Therefore, so there are subtle differences between secondary MR and acute MR and chronic MR. Right. So let's come back to our patient now. What next? Somebody said antibiotics already. Okay, 1 second. I'm going to make it bigger. So treatment given, first step we gave antibiotics. Somebody started ceftriaxone and azithromycin. So keeping in mind atypical pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, everything. What next?
Oxygen support.
Hey, one person please. Yes, oxygen support. Yes, we have already given oxygen.
So despite
this patient went on ventilator very soon after that.
Yes, it was the next step. Then diuresis, sir.
Why diuresis?
He's having pulmonary edema, sir, because of the acute MR.
Okay.
So diuresis will help.
To some extent, diuresis will help to reduce the pulmonary edema and improve oxygenation.
Peripheral vasodilatation we will need, sir. Systemic vasodilator.
Agreed. What else?
Blood pressure is.
What else?
So we have to find the cause of the acute MR.
Oh, don't tell me how you have to find the cause. You'll tell the relatives go and find the cause. Don't tell me that. Tell me I will do this to do that. See, this examination never says this. We have to find the cause. Who will find the cause?
Sir, given the ECG had some ST depressions in the anterior precordial leads, I would still like to revisit the echo, the other views, to look for any inferior or posterior wall regional abnormalities.
No. Ventricular
Surgical management.
Okay, sir.
Ventricular wall function was normal.
Okay.
Patient requires surgery, sir. It's a case of acute MR.
Okay. So give 2 shots of antibiotic, 1 diuretic shot, and go straight to surgery. Surgeon is at home. You have to work up. You have to stabilize the patient, work up the patient. Come on, man. Don't say surgery straight
Sir,
away.
IABP is a consideration.
You have to stabilize the patient. So how do you stabilize the patient? Oxygen, ventilation, correct acidosis. Don't you want to give vasodilators? This is a strong indication for inodilators, where you dilate the peripheral vessels so that it helps to reduce the resistance to LV ejection and improve the forward flow from the left ventricle. Inodilator is one of the ideal indications, either dobutamine or milrinone or even nitroprusside infusion. This is one of the strong indications for nitroprusside or the milrinone. Yes, agreed?
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely you should avoid vasopressin. If the patient is blood pressure of 90 and all, please go out sick, don't start dopamine or noradrenaline, avoid vasopressin. And then somebody said IABP for ventilation, mechanical support, definitely. You have to unload the ventricle. You have to get the patient into good shape before you send for surgery. You can't send the patient straight for surgery. So you have to put a IABP. In some other centers, they may put some other form of mechanical support, LVAD, whatever you have. In India, IABP is the only thing we have here at the moment. So the put. And then, do you want to do any more workup before surgery or straight surgery? Don't you want to do coronary angiogenesis? Acute papillary muscle rupture in a 52-year-old man diabetic. Don't you want to be sure that he is not coronary artery disease? We should do mitral valve replacement. Don't you want to do graft artery at the same time? Which artery will be involved for papillary muscle rupture posterior?
Usually left circumflex, sir.
Yeah. So you have to know the coronary angio, no?
Yes.
And don't you want? Okay, I'll come to that later. Don't you want to send blood cultures? Acute MR, 10 days duration. How do you know it's not endocarditis?
So cultures were already sent, sir. You told in the initial
I
slide.
only showed you. So I said from culture only. If you remember, I didn't show blood culture. Of course, we don't wait for result of blood culture, but we have to send blood culture. We have to do a coronary angiogram. Okay, so once you have ventilated the patient, once you have put a IABP, take the patient, do a quick coronary angiogram. But the coronary angiogram is only on the way to surgery. Don't bring him back from the cath lab. You got my point?
Yes.
Stabilize the patient, mechanical support, shift to cath lab, coronary angio, and he goes to surgery from there. Doesn't come back to ICU. And early surgery is the answer. Whatever be the cause of mitral valve rupture, the only answer is surgery, either repair or replacement. Okay, that sounds like a good plan.
Yes.
Okay. So in the examination, you must be very, very systematic. Never say the moment I said, what is your treatment? Surgery. No, that should not be your answer. You want to show the examiner that you are mature enough to be a consultant. So you must tell as if you are actually managing a live patient in the ICU. So what do you send bloods, you do antibiotics, stabilize, ventilate, vasodilator, mechanical support, then call the surgeon, say I'm going to do an angio. From the angio, he is coming to your theatre. Arrange blood, all of it takes time. Don't say surgery at the first sentence. Understood?
Yes.
Okay. So there are the numerous causes of acute MR, ruptured cordy, could be degenerative, could be spontaneous. Ruptured papillary muscle commonly occurs in ischemic heart disease. Myxomatous valve, infective endocarditis, and trauma. Trauma, of course, we can exclude. Infective endocarditis is unlikely because his fever was only for 2 days. His symptoms started 10 days ago, but his fever was only for 2 days. Okay, so unlikely, but then we can never be sure. Could it be myxomatous valve?
No such signs on the echo, sir.
No such signs on the echo. Could it be ruptured papillary muscle?
Possible,
Less likely, well, possible because we didn't have any LV wall motion anomalies. The troponin was not very high. There was no evidence of myocardial infarction. It seems to be predominantly left heart failure. So between ruptured papillary muscle and major caudal rupture, I would go more for
cardi.
But again, but I can't rule out ruptured papillary muscle unless I do a coronary angio. Or sometimes even at surgery only they can make out. Because sometimes spontaneous ruptures of muscles also can happen. Okay. So these are the common cause of MR. And remember, asymmetrical or unilateral pulmonary edema in an adult of acute onset, the cause is acute rupture of mitral valve and mitral regurgitation. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All of you must also be familiar with the Carpentier classification of MR. The first group is normal movement of the mitral valve, where perforation and other things happen. Second one is excessive movement of the mitral valve, where there is the prolapse of the mitral valve, rupture of the mitral valve and flail movement. And finally, there is a Carpentier type 3A, where it is restricted movement in both systole and diastole, like the rheumatic heart disease typically, rheumatic MSMR. And Carpentier 3B is where the LV is dilated and abnormal. The papillary muscle is moved away and it's tethering the PML or the AML, causing eccentric MR. So these are the classical type 1 Carpentier, type 2 Carpentier, type 3A and 3B. More recently, they have identified 2 more varieties of MR. One is due to the systolic anterior movement of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So some people call that the type 4 MR. And the fifth variety is also known as hybrid variety, where there are multiple mechanisms happening. Now, multiple mechanisms, it's important to classify it because then the surgeon will know how to operate that one. And there is a sixth variety of MR now also being described, also called as atrial MR, where the atria is dilated and causes dilatation of the mitral annulus, and therefore there is severe MR. That's called atrial MR. So initially Carpentier described only 3 varieties of MR, actually 4, 1, 2, 3A and 3B. But now we have systolic anterior movement as type 4. Then we have atrial MR, and what's the other one I said?
Multiple
hybrid, multiple factors. Okay. So yeah, MR is an important topic, both clinical and theory.